So I'll just keep the camera switched off because I have some connectivity issues in this region as I'm traveling. Yeah. So we would be taking up the second block, that is about tribal society in transition. Yeah. Yeah, Mr. Ritis, you want to say something? If not, you can just mute your microphone. Well, what I was trying to say is that we will be taking up the theme on tribal societies in transition. The first thing is that, the way some anthropologists of of the previous generation, they have looked at tribal societies. uh, the societies then appeared to be quite closed, because closed means when you are looking at these societies, they remain more or less in terms of their social institutions, their structures, they more or less they remain the same. When I'm talking about these tribal societies in the present contemporary times, they have so many different historical forces acting on them. When you talk about the forces in the period of late modernity, the forces of globalization, you talk about tribes in the neoliberal times. So basically, here today in this class, we would be looking into three units that has been covered in your second block. It talks about the different tribal economic structures and the recent issues of gender, class, identity politics among the tribes in contemporary times. So, what I'm trying to say here is that we would take up each of these unit one by one, and maybe we can take a break after an hour around 4. And after that break, we can take certain questions, some of the questions, and then we can move on to the rest of the chapter. So, what I'm trying to say is we will be starting with the idea of governance among the tribal societies. So, in your text, there is a basic definition given by World Bank document that has defined governance as the manner in which power is exercised in utilizing a country's economic, social resources for development. So, how do you use the resources, and how do you look at this very idea of development as far as a particular society is concerned? And for UNDP, governance is something that that concerns itself with exercise of economic, political, administrative authority to manage a country's affair at all levels. All said and done, when we talk about governance in the tribal society, what is the major challenge that we face? You know, could you please mute yourself, Mr. Ritesh? Yeah, thank you. So, what I'm trying to say is that when we are talking about governance, there are two different perspectives of looking at this idea of development. In research methods also, we normally take up an observer's point of view and an actor's point of view. When you are looking into, a tribal society or any community for that sake, we have to set off some of our preconceived notions. So it is very important to understand from whose point of view am I looking at this entire thing. I'm observing things, because observing is not just looking at certain things. The basic challenge with social sciences is that When you are observing something without our knowledge, we tend to use certain lenses. These lenses we might have, gathered because of our upbringing, because of our socio-economic positions. So I'll just give you an example. If I'm wearing a green color glass, I will see it all green. So that's the reason why we say that when we are looking at a particular society, from whose point of view are we looking at it? From the point of view that represents me as a researcher, or am I trying to represent the people of the community on whom I am trying to conduct this study? Got it clear? So when we are talking about the tribal society, basically we tend to see things from their point of view. When we are talking about development, how, what does it mean to be development from their point of view? Not from, if I take you all into consideration, not from the point of view of a middle class, the kind of middle class upbringing you have, the kind of education you are exposed to. They have a different kind of an orientation. So what would it mean to be developed in that kind of a society? So, in this context, when we are talking about governance, governance is not just about, enabling certain decision making capability, but when we are talking about the tribal society, we need to take up the things from their point of view. Like, what does it mean to be democratic from their point of view? What does it mean to have development in their society? The way we look at development, they might not see it in the same way. So here, if you look at the various, debates and discussion on self government, you will see that, you know many bureaucratic, what you say, decision makers, they have failed in delivering the key to development, or the kind of aspirations we had when it comes to the tribal society. So basically, the thing that we need to be very clear about is that when we are talking about governance, the very idea of being governed, or the very idea of democracy or power, must come from their point of view. So one of the most important ways where many scholars have pointed out that it is only with the idea of a self government that in that way you can really empower these tribal societies. You can allow them to speak their own voices, which maybe you will not be able to achieve if we are trying to impose our, what do we say, our perspective on development, or some kind of an empowerment. For example, I would see that, you might have heard of this Niyamgiri conflict, the Niyamgiri struggle in Odisha among the Dongriya Kandhas. It, that struggle received an international platform. It was one of the most talked about movements when it came to tribal rights. The thing is that what I'm trying to say, that when we look at the very idea of development from our point of view, that is from the perspective of a middle class uh, background, uh, who are into, who have been raised in a kind of an urban or a semi rural setup. For them, it would appear to be quite a foolish decision when you would see that, okay, the government is offering them so much of compensation. The government would be offering them, a good piece of home, or an alternative livelihood, along with a security for job, which appears to be lucrative from our point of view. But if you ask any of the tribes in the hills of Niyamgiri, as a some of the documented statements that came from the elderly tribes of those reasons of the hill. They said that, I don't want, you need this jungle, you need these mountains. I don't want anything else in compensation. I don't need a government job, I don't need a housing colony, I don't need any other thing. You just replace this jungle with another jungle. You want to take away this jungle, give me another jungle. Then it might appear to us that it is how stupid of them. you know what would they be doing in this jungle? They don't want to think about their future. They really don't understand what it means to remain in a backward kind of a scenario. They are going to spoil the upcoming generation. But what you see that the point of view that I have regarding development, the glasses that I have put on, I have a different idea of development. But if you look at from their eyes, they feel that, they are in the most secure place. They are in a place which is free of pollution. They don't have any health issues like we have. We earn a lot, and at the same time we spend all our earning in the hospital. They don't have to go through that kind of a crisis. So for them, they are in the ideal state, and replacing them from that kind of an ideal state means a act of foolishness from their point of view. But if you ask us, we would find this act foolish. So basically what I'm trying to say is that as a researcher, one needs to bring the voices of these communities from their own point of view. So, when we are talking about governance, let us not impose the idea of governance that we have been looking at or we have been experiencing all our lives in our own setups. As I told you that we have so many different definitions of good governance available from World Bank, from UNDP, from major government sources. But keeping everything aside, as we have already defined that governance is defined as the tradition and institutions by which authority in a country is exercised. Okay, so if at all we are asking about exercising a particular authority, what kind of authority are we talking about, and whose authority is it? So basically, when we are talking about the tribal community, the authority has to be their own authority, because we have different ways of looking at things, isn't it? As I told you, we have put on different glasses. When I put on these glasses, my pair of glasses, I see everything green because the color of my glass is green. They have a different colored glass. They will see everything in that particular color. So basically, if we have a holistic idea of governance and we tend to impose it on the tribal society, because for me, governance means, having a very good, robust education system, having very good highways, having all kinds of infrastructure. They will not, you know, accept that idea of governance. For them, would mean something else. So basically, we are talking about a governance that would come with democratic decentralization, that would, make them accountable to have their own participation. They would be accountable for their own decisions at the local level. And at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that nothing gets imposed on them. It is their ways of looking at things. It is how they decide what is good for them or what is bad for them, because that has been the very problem in dealing with tribal societies, because we have always sought to have a mouthpiece for them, and we see things from our eyes, from our point of view. And we really believe, we seriously, for a very long period of time, we believe that they are not in a position to judge what is good or bad for them, so let's do it for them. That has been quite a mistaken notion on our part. So in order to have these local kind of self governments, we have the, the how the local governance can be fortified. We have many provisions in our constitution. So this schedule 5 of the constitution, it's mainly, it is meant to protect the interest of the tribes. And in these scheduled areas, you will see that mostly it is followed in regions of uh, some of the states of Bihar, Maharashtra, then just give me a moment. Yeah, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Himachal Pradesh. So the fifth schedule of our constitution, it tries to administer scheduled areas and for the scheduled tribes. And apart from that, you have the sixth schedule. Basically, the sixth schedule, it has its jurisdiction in the states of Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Tripura. And they have created certain autonomous district councils that can look into their affairs, the affairs of the tribal people. Because mostly, when we why do we need to have this special protection for the tribal people? Because right from the very beginning, we have seen that the tribes live with the fear of being exploited by non-tribal people. Normally, they call them dikus. Dikus are the outsiders, and especially they come in the form of an exploiter. It could be anyone. It could be the contractor, it could be the forest officer, it could be a non-tribal feudal leader, or the monarch, or the government, the colonial government. It could be anybody. So the basic idea is they are non-tribal. They have exploited these tribes. So in order to protect their interest, for a very long period of time, they lived with the fear of being exploited, and that's the reason they never got themselves integrated with the mainstream population. And besides, it's another part of the story, but the most important thing is, this is the way they wanted to live their lives. They had a different idiom and meaning of development and a good life, which doesn't match with ours. We have different yardstick for measuring the quality of life. They have a different way of doing so. So generally, the district council that I was talking about, that comes under the schedule 6 of the constitution. It has tried to formulate certain rules that is related to distribution, acquisition, and use of land other than reserved forest. Because when the forest department was set up in the middle of the 19th century, they had, all of a sudden, they had many restrictions in the sense that for the when the colonial rulers, they came to our country, it was for the first time they announced that the natural resources, be it in terms of the forest, the hills, the ocean, it belongs to the state. And that is the reason, as an Indian, we have seen so many invasions and conquest. But normally, we have so much to talk about the British colonial powers when it comes to the degree and intensity of exploitation, because they became successful in bringing certain structural changes which rest of the conquerors never thought of. For example, we had certain traditional rights, the right over water, the right over forest, the right over the mountains. It was something which traditionally people believed that it has been bestowed to them by the divine power. But all of a sudden there is a new government coming up which says that the jungle belongs to me, the ocean belongs to me, the mountain belongs to me, you have to pay a tax for doing this, you cannot enter the forest. So that was something which was ridiculous, and it was out of our wits. They couldn't make any sense out of it. So there was a denial of your basic rights over natural resources, certain things that has been given to you by nature. That's the reason why Mahatma Gandhi started with this issue of salt, with his Dandi March. Why did he pick up that issue? Because salt was something which would come free. You take up if you live in the coastal regions, you take up a pot full of sea water, put it in the sun, the water would evaporate, and what you find, what is left behind is salt. So collecting salt, which is so very natural, which doesn't cost you anything, and yet the government says that you have no right to make salt, you have to purchase it from the government, you have to pay a tax for it. So basically, these are the basic rights they were fighting for. And that's the reason why Gandhiji took up that issue of salt. Because you know if you look at those times, you would see that the Britishers would raid somebody's house. Wherever they will find a boiling pot, they would break the pot, they would have all kinds of atrocities. So similarly, when we are talking about the tribes, and they could see that the forest department, the officers in the forest departments, even though they were supposed to be for the well-being of the people in general, they find them atrocious, because they were the ones who said that now that you have picked a few branches, few dried up branches or leaves, you have collected some fuel wood from the soil, from the forest, you need to pay a fine, I can put you behind the bars. That was atrocious. So basically what I'm trying to say is that we believe in a system where governance is something which is not people friendly. So here the Constitution of India guarantees that the tribes live in a world which appears to be secure to them, in which they can have their own decision making. And that's the reason why they had all these provisions of scheduled area, of your idea of having reservation for the tribes. So basically when I'm talking about this schedule 6, you will see that there is this district council that talks about how mm, distribution of land could be done among the tribes so that they are not exploited, how they can manage all kinds of forest, how they can really go for a healthy source of livelihood. Because there is a ban on shifting cultivation. So how do they shift to an alternative way, development of different water sources for irrigation, development of village police, town police, education, health, sanitation, appointment of a village chief, inheritance rights. They needed to talk about all these things. Apart from, you have these Panchayati Raj institutions, which came along the 73rd Constitutional Amendment in 1993. And it was a major historic act as far as democratic decentralization and devolving of power amongst the people were concerned. So there was a need, a felt need, that more and more number of tribals must participate at the level of the self government, because since they have a different kind of a social system, it is important for them to have a kind of a self government, and this particular act only facilitated that. And it was a provision was made that one third of the seats of the tribe for the tribal communities be reserved at different levels for self governance. So that was one of the major decisions where the PRIs, they were trying to make these tribal people self reliant, where they can take up new practices of agriculture, animal husbandry, fishery, micro irrigation. And they can also look into different not only certain practical needs in terms of drinking water or shelter, but certain kind of needs that can really bring a change in their status. And apart from that, you have the PESA, that is the Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act, PESA Act 1966. This area is actually sorry this act is mostly implemented in the areas of Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Gujarat, Himachal Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Odisha, and Rajasthan. And basically, this act is meant for safeguarding the traditional rights of the tribal people over the natural resources. So this PESA ensures that all kind of development projects, they go through certain kind of local institutions. And suppose you are trying to go for a highway through a tribal village, or you are trying to have certain kind of development infrastructure uh, near the periphery of a tribal village. So the PESA would ask you that in order to have the clearance for such kind of development activity, one has to, all the projects, they must pass through the local institutions. You have to get the ratification of these tribes, if at all we are talking about the tribal villages. Then you have the rights of the traditional rights, forest rights, which was not recognized, and there has always been a tussle between the tribes and the forest department for a very long period of time, till the recognition of Forest Rights Act came in 2006. So basically, here you will see that the Forest Right Acts, FRA, that is popularly known as, uh, it is meant for protecting the rights, the traditional rights of the tribals as far as forest products are concerned. So, FRA has it talks about three key rights to the members of the scheduled tribes. Firstly, legal title to land cultivated in forest areas before 13 December 2005. Right to use minor forest products, grazing ground and water bodies in the forest areas that they can access and use, power to conserve community forest resource and protect wildlife. uh, the department can grant them legal rights that can that for with which they can protect these community forest resources, and to empower them to strengthen their local self governance. And at the same time, it helps them to address livelihood security, that could lead to poverty alleviation. And they can have look into the issues of conservation and management of natural resources. So basically, we are talking about three, four these acts like Forest Right, FRA, the PESA, the scheduled area recognition of a scheduled area, schedule 5 and 6. All these provisions, constitutional provisions, have been made so that the tribes could be comfortable in their own community, the way they want to live, and so that they would not live with the fear of being exploited by a non-tribal population. Because democracy in that sense means that they would have the freedom to choose the way they want to live their lives, not the way we perceive the, the idea of development that we have in our minds. Then apart from that, we would see that the way we look at politics, basically when we talk about the politics in contemporary times, I don't know if you have come across the different kinds of social movements. And if you look at the tribal movements, for a very long period of time, the movement was considered to be, we have categorized the social movements in terms of old and new movements. When we're talking about the old movements, they refer to certain rights associated with certain resource mobilization in that way. For example, if you look at the struggle of the tribals as far as their access to using forest products was concerned, we could say that okay, it's a part of the old thing. Because, or take for example the Tebhaga movement, or even though it's non-tribal movement also, or the because they have a material aspiration through that movement. But the new movements, basically they are these identity politics. It is not related to anything material, but it is the certain non-materialistic ethos that these movements center around. So today, if for example, when at the beginning of the class we were talking about the Niyamgiri movement in Odisha. So Niyamgiri movement, if I look at it, it has many dimensions. You can say that it's a anti-industrialization movement, it's an anti-capitalist movement, it's an environmental movement, and the most important part is this movement is waged by the tribes themselves. There is no third party or a middle class voice that has a, that is a, what do you say, mediating between the tribal population and the state. And most important thing is that it is a movement based on identity politics, because as I told you right from the beginning that the major issues of the neoliberal and contemporary times, because the theme of today's discussion is tribal society in transition. Why do you think that tribal society has to remain in transition? The reason being that you have so many different social forces acting on these tribal societies. So here, when we talk about the tribes, they are not saying ki okay, let me have these access to this forest product, let me have this kind of a material benefit. What they are trying to say is that, let me be what I want to be. You don't try to make me something that I am not, and you have your own perception of being, of leading a good kind of a life. So in that sense, it can be called a identity movement. So identity politics, suggest a kind of a political orientation that builds around their social identity, the social identity of being a tribe. So here, in most of the important democracies, you will see that these social identities have been the major indicators as to how the kind of vote banks formation would be there, how people would be, connecting themselves to different kind of issues. So here in the tribal communities, it is, the issues that they have, it is not just restricted to certain kind of material benefits only. It is the perception of their own self that they want to retain, the traits that they want to retain. When we talk about, for example, there was a violence in Kalinganagar, or if you look at the Jharkhand issue, where for a very long period of time, these tribals, they were fighting against the hydroelectric project, and they had their own traditional weapons with them, and to which the state had the kind of an allegation that they are using lethal kind of weapons, and which is harmful to them, other human beings, and they have to be, they have to get rid of those kind of things. But the thing is that it is a part of their identity. If you ask a Sikh, because they have, that those six 5 or 6 elements that creates the identity of being a Sikh. You have a kirpal, you have a uh, knife or something. Similarly, those weapons are part of the tribal identity. So basically, they are trying not only to fight the nature of oppression that they suffer, which is different from that of a non tribal, but at the same time, what they are trying to do is to retain the very traits of being a tribal. So basically, the identity politics that they are trying to talk about is to be what they are, allow them to be what they are. They are not saying that, you give me this or you give me that, I don't want any material benefits, but the way I am, just allow me to be what I am. So basically, if you look at these, and today we have started recognizing these voices when we talk about, the new kind of social movements taking up a momentum. And apart from that, the kind of issues that we talk about when we are talking about tribal politics or politicization of these tribal issues, the most important thing is political participation. Political participation, we normally we say now this, it is the right to protest, the right to free speech, the right to vote, right to influence or get involved in any kind of political parties. So if you are talking about the tribal political participation, it has directly some link to the idea of educational development. And as we all know that we can witness low levels of literacy among the tribes, so the participation level is also low. And when you talk about the political consciousness, perhaps the way you have been handling or functioning democracy, it's something which they are not very acquainted with. So political participation here not only depends upon political awareness, but it has to promote that kind of political awareness. And in tribal society, political participation is closely associated with, the characteristics of its very society, the kind of behavior which is not very individualistic. If they decide to cast a vote, they would do at the level of the community. So in the tribal communities of India, they participate in politics in various ways, as voters, as candidates, as members of the political parties, as elected members of different political institutions in the planning or evaluation bodies, or just somebody who can democratically exercise his or her right, the right to choose a party, right to elect a desirable candidate, right to promote development. So basically, we look at political participation in that way. But as I told you, that the next level is that, you know, it is also a kind that, when I'm talking about for a very long period of time, when we are talking about tribal rights, we used to confine ourselves with cultural rights. Okay, this is the right of a tribe because they do this kind of a performance, they carry these things, this is the way they eat, this is the way they live. But today it is not just confined to culture, it is a more assertive political right that we are talking about. Now, coming to who represents actually these tribes, because as I told you in the very beginning of the lecture, that we always had this tendency to feel and believe strongly that, tribes, they are not, they don't have the capacity or they don't have the judgment to take their own decisions. So, as educated persons who come from these middle class urban or these other kind of backgrounds, they could take better decisions meant for the development of the tribes. So mostly you would see that during the colonial times, they were considered to be in a backward condition, and there were not enough capable members who could be represented as tribals. So tribal representation, that issue emerged during the British rule, and they started having spokesperson for tribal interest to enter the legislature. And basically, you know this thing, and it was not necessarily the tribal, because as I told you, they had a very strong sense of the decus, that okay, somebody is a tribal or a non-tribal. So after independence, this scenario gained certain complexity, where the tribal people believe that they need to be represented by somebody from their own community, so that their own voice could be reflected. And it is not it is not that a non tribal is not in a capacity to voice their issues, but the thing is that it is something that comes from their own experiences, it is grounded in their experiences. That the kind of voice they are talking about, it is a united voice. So mostly they address themselves as we adivasis, that we feeling, when because mostly we refer to them as a tribal community. And as I told you in the last class, that community by definition is not only marked by territoriality, but also this bond, of we being we, this we feeling. So both these things, both these major traits you will find among the tribes. So who can speak for or on behalf of another? No. Why not they themselves? The recognition of community based identities, that would lead to special representation, so that they can come up with their everyday life, their sorrows, their everyday issues, that might appear trivial to us, but only somebody who has experienced or lived that life can better understand that scenario. And basically, now we are talking about political representation of the tribes. And when we are talking about political representation, we can see that the articles 330, 332, 334, they provide reservation for seats to the STs along with the SCs in the Lok Sabha. And you have article 243D that reserves one third of seats for the tribal communities at different levels of the self government, most popularly in the Panchayati Raj institutions. So there is a reservation of around 7.5% of seats in the lower house of the parliament. And then, as I told you, that mostly these are the contemporary what do you say issues of governance related to tribes. And apart from that, as I told you, the contemporary tribal issues, mostly the tribes, they started getting suffocated and having issues when the entire modern development agenda started up. you know as I told you that when was it that India experienced modernity? Normally, when you make a comparison between the European society and the Indian society, we say that modernity arrived in Europe with the three revolutions, that is your industrial revolution, your French revolution, and your enlightenment. We never had any of these revolutions. So the kind of modernity that we experienced, it was uh, we can say not very smooth and gradual. It was jerky, it was quite very, you can say, uh, very jerky in the sense, because our encounter with modernity was mediated through the colonial power, through the Britishers. So it was so very sudden, and so very, it was not jolt free. And you will see that when we are talking about the colonial imperial British, I have already told earlier that you know we take them as somebody who has drained the Indian economy in a much stronger way. We, as I told you, we had seen many conquests and many conquerors have crossed paths through this country. But we believe that the greatest damage has been caused by the colonial Britishers. The reason being that the kind of structural changes they brought in the society. And in case of the tribes, they had to pay heavily because of the structural changes. Most importantly, these structural changes came in the form of your forest department. When the Britishers allowed that all natural resources, they are the property of the state, they had set up this forest department, which denied them entry, which denied them all kinds of forest goods. So that was a major crisis for them. Then the very idea of displacement, or when you have these mining industries, or you have these hydroelectric projects, or where some projects because of railway tracks being created. So basically, these were the major issues. And today you will see that the major corporates in the contemporary times, be it POSCO, Vedanta, they have created so much of what you say debates in this tribal region. Or look at the Sardar Sarovar Dam, or look at the context of Odisha. You have so many people's movement coming up, and mostly most of these people's movement are located in these tribal inhabited belts. The most important thing is that Odisha is a rich mineral state, and the issue is that the tribals sit on these minerals, and that is the reason why we find it problematic to displace them and extract these mines, which we believe it would be more lucrative in the sense, because our idea of development is development through revenue creation. And for the tribals, for them, development is something different. They don't believe in this idea of development. They believe that the way they are living, where they are healthy, the way they are using the natural resources, the way they are feeding on these natural products, that keeps them healthy mentally and physically. And at the same time, the kind of livelihood they engage themselves with, that is the idea of development. So basically, they have in contemporary times, in when you take a look across, you will see so many struggles, tribal, that these tribal communities have against the corporates, against the state. And mostly it is either because of some hydroelectric project, some dams, some mines, or some industries being developed in their place. So basically, the idea is that their idea of their traditional rights is being hampered. So this entire thing takes place in the realm of certain material domain, but at the same time we can say that there is a new kind of a tribal identity politics brewing up in contemporary times. And the kind of identity politics that we are talking about, it is different from the idea of politics we had in the previous generation. So this was about the first unit of your block 2. Any questions on this? Any questions? No? Okay, now we'll take up the second unit of this block. And we have almost 10 minutes before we take a break. So I'll start off with the second unit.
Hello, good evening, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah, yes,
Ma'am, actually, I wanted to share one thing with you about this
yes.
regarding this quote, ma'am. That it is not it is related with the tribal society, but not particularly with the northeast or like that, or northern or southern tribe. I'm
No, no,
I'm
no,
I'm
no.
I am a native of MP, and here there are various tribes like Bhil tribe and other tribes,
Mm-hmm.
Coal tribe and other tribes. But actually,
Okay.
ma'am, this incident took place a few months back when I was in workplace, and that incident actually motivated me to take this course of tribal
Okay.
studies.
Okay.
So
What
that
was
is
the incident?
the incident was a bit tragic, as one of my colleague who is one of my colleague who is belong to some tribe. I exactly don't know which tribe of MP, but he is localite of Ujjain. As we are working in a hospital in Ujjain, and I don't know, as I have studied about the tribes and prepared for civil services earlier. So I have many friends and colleagues who have been working with me and belong to the tribal group. But this particular incident really left a mark on me.
Okay.
The incident was like, uh, I don't know, was it a grudgeful act or something act of animistic act like that. But as we were working in a hospital, there was a lab in the
Hmm.
fifth floor, and I being the administrator and he being a junior staff, asked me to accompany him to the lab, man, and
Hmm.
asked me to accompany to the pathology lab where various testing takes place, and a particularly unethical practice was done by him, as I had to follow the norms and protocols. But in front of me, he gave a test tube of test tube for blood testing, the vial that is required for blood testing, and he handed this particular due to the in charge of the pathology with whom he had good connections. No reporting, no OPD or no pathology test was reported directly to the, like, report was created on
Hmm.
the base of protocol. He just hand over the test tubes, and as I was accompanying him, I observed all this. As at that time, I don't know, I considered friendly nature with that person. I wouldn't name him. So uh, that time afterwards, when the report came, I realized that something is fishy going on. So
Hmm.
afterward, when the report came, he showed me that देखो मैंने तुम्हारा नाम प्रिंट करवाया इस रिपोर्ट पे और तुम्हारा टेस्ट हो गया HIV का. Luckily that test didn't come out positive. His test didn't come out positive, but then afterward the lot of tussle went on, and I had to leave the job to stay away from the controversy.
What was the purpose behind this test? I mean, what they would have proved by, proving somebody HIV positive? What was their purpose? I'm not able to get.
Ma'am, their purpose, I don't know. I only felt that as I was very close to the boss, and boss was giving me importance than him. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and as the assistant administrative officer was my boss, and I was indulged in the activity, like he gave me keys and everything of his office, and this person was actually working from around 1.5 years before me. So even after that, the boss didn't trust him. So I don't know exact reason, but this
No,
this
the blood sample was that of a tribes, or what was it?
no, I'm not only focusing on tribe, but the blood
Okay.
sample was actually belong to that person who belongs to a tribal person.
Okay. Okay.
So
So,
it was his only, the person who gave him, it was his blood sample, and
hmm.
he had some relationship with other women, not his wife only, but some women from the
Hmm.
hospital
Okay.
and other
Okay.
places.
So the purpose was to denigrate that particular person from the tribal community.
No, no, ma'am, you are actually, it is not clear. The person who gave me,
No.
he gave my name instead of his name for the HIV test.
Okay. 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 Oh. Okay. Got it. Got it. Okay. That's some dangerous game plan going on.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that promoted me to take this course and understand the tribes in detail, ma'am, so that I can do something for the development and changing the scenarios like this, and that this doesn't happen with any other people or like that.
Normally also in mostly in medical anthropology, it's a very common practice that when they're talking about genetics and the genealogical traits, they collect blood samples because through invasive methods, And for that there are so many ethical committees, clearance committee. I cannot just walk up to a tribal community and ask them for their blood or any kind of body fluid. I have to go through different layers of ethical committees in order to have that approval. And what
Yeah,
so maybe that's the reason why we have tend to protect these tribes in the name of research also in that context. Anyway,
actually,
uh,
it was not the blood sample of some other person who belonged to some
mhm.
other tribe. It was the blood sample of my colleague only.
Okay,
Who,
I
who
got your point. I got your point. I got your point. They were something was fishy, and maybe they were trying to come up with something else.
yeah,
Okay.
ma'am. So I am still in confused that why this happened. But actually,
Mhm.
let's
Even
see
we
how
still
much.
do not have a clear picture of, as you said, why it happened.
No,
Okay.
no, not exactly. He just was once he told me that because of the Baba Sahib Ambedkar, you people are safe. Like this, he told me and told me that I am the superior than you, and then you are
Mhm.
inferior than me, and because of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, I am your senior, and because of the constitution, you people are saved. Like this type of things he told me. So I
Okay,
thought,
there
let
are, yeah, they have all kinds of biases. I understand, and the reason why we have all kinds of privileges, because in my class also people come up with questions as to why would they have so much of benefits, why this idea of scheduled 5 and 6 has been created, why should they have reservation. But the thing is that they have been subject to certain kind of historic disadvantages which not the rest of the population has ever witnessed, or they are in a position to understand that. So
yeah,
that's the
true, ma'am.
reason
Yeah,
why
that's
we
true.
call it positive discrimination. And
Okay,
when we talk about, I'll come to it later, maybe we'll take a 5 minutes break, I'll take up the discussion after that.
sure, ma'am. Thank you.
Welcome back. So, we've had taken up this discussion on the issues of tribal concerns in the contemporary times. And what I was talking to you about is the issues, the idea of special prevention that we have for the scheduled tribes. The reason being that, when we talk about the idea of equality, we normally look at things from a very generic conditions. For example, I would see that okay, each one of you would be given a pair of shoes. That is equality. But the thing is that you might not need those shoes. Instead of shoe, you might need something else. Or the shoe that has been given to me, it doesn't come in your particular size. So it might not fit you at all. So it is not going to be of any help. So when we are talking about this equality, we should have in mind the idea of differential equality. When my needs are different, our needs as human beings, we are so different. As communities, we are so very diverse, and so would be our needs. So since our needs are different, we cannot have a similar formal kind of an equality that we have to talk about. We have to look at things with the realm in the realm of substantive equality. And maybe that's the reason why we have so many special provisions meant for the sections of the scheduled tribe population. So that is how we would be taking up this discussion further. And maybe for the second unit, we would be looking into the tribal economic system. And as I told you earlier, that you know the tribes, in the last class we have already discussed the different cultural and different components of the tribal social system. And when it comes to the economic system, that is also so very unique from the rest of the mainstream population. So, talking about the economic system, we can say that basically an economy, how do we define an economy? A economy is a set of institutionalized activities which combine natural resources, labor, technology to acquire, produce, and distribute material goods and specialized services in a structured and repetitive fashion. So, that is how economies work. And if I talk about the tribal economy, Dalton has identified three major features that would characterize the tribal economy. First thing is the structural arrangement and enforced rules for acquisition and production of material goods and services. They have a different kind of a structural arrangement. Second, in the process of acquisition and production of goods and services, division of labor, use of natural resources, and application of technology that is involved. And as we know that when we are talking about the tribal context, the technology that they use is quite simple. And the third component of any economic system is distribution process. You have many devices and practices such as the market, that would be creating avenues for exchange and other kinds of transaction. Now, coming to this idea of tribal economy, the basic tribal features of this economy are as given by Rai and Vidyarthi. That is, it has a forest based economy. Most of the tribes, they need to survive with the help of a forest. And that is the reason why in most of these social movements involving the tribes, the demand has always been a forest. They have never asked for any other resource, like other mainstream movements have, the way they have gathered momentum. For tribes, it has mostly been this forest based economy. So, because they have you will see that most of the researchers, they have found out that look at the Birhors or of Chota Nagpur, Chenchus of Andhra Pradesh, Juangs of Odisha, the Kadars of Kerala. They have all, they are in the process of harnessing the forest resources, collecting edible roots, vegetables, fruits, honey, all kinds of forest products. And they normally use it for consumption or for selling it in the market. So basically, they have a forest based economy. Apart from that, they have domestic or familial mode of production. So what is this familial mode of production? What I am trying to say that families, in the pre-modern times, used to be the unit of production as well as the unit of consumption. Pick up any family, any home in a pre-modern time, say be it in the Indian or in the European context, because you might have asked your grandparents about it. They hardly buy anything, they would be buying anything from the market. They normally produce everything at home. There wouldn't be any single product that they would be procuring from the market. So what I'm trying to say, that every household was like an industry in the pre-modern times. What did modernity do to you? Modernity severed from the families the idea of production and reduced this family, this household, into a unit of consumption only. So now when we look at the family, we hardly produce anything. We are into these service industries, or we provide in some kind of services, and mostly we procure everything from the market. So what I'm trying to say, that the families in those times, and especially in these tribal economies, they used to be, the unit of consumption and production, and the members of the family, they were like engaged in this entire process of production and consumption. So the entire decision, of allocation of labor would be governed by the norms of the family. It is the family members who would be working among themselves. The division of labor in the tribal household would be, based on the basis of age and gender. The kind of job that the aged could do, that kind of job would be given to them. The kind of gender norms that you have, such kind of activities and tasks would be allocated to you on the basis of your gender as well. Then the kind of technology that I was talking about, they believed in a very simple kind of technology. And you will see that it could be something that they can directly procure it from the forest. No, they don't have to go through any complicated process, and the degree of wastage is extremely low. So basically, the level of subsistence, they try to maintain just the subsistence level of production. They are not into the process of, making products for you know for marketing them or for selling them. It is just meant for consumption. So here, the kind of set technology that they use is extremely simple. Some examples would be the Ao Nagas. They would be just using these ordinary axe, or for felling of the trees. Or you have the Mundas and the Oraons, the Wills. They would be using just a single piece of wood instead of a plow. So they would not be using anything else. And another important feature of this tribal economy is the absence of profit motive in exchange. As I told you earlier, they do not do anything for the sense of profit. They just do it for consumption, they just do it for subsistence and survival, because they hardly have any monetary needs. If you look into a tribal household also, you will not find many consumer goods in them. Their living is very simple. It would be, the room would be looking too very empty. Hardly very simple products would be there. So they are not actually in need of money. They have other mediums of exchange. And mostly they do not go for profit. Then, since I have told that the tribes, they have a very strong sense of community, they try to have a kind of a cooperative unit in the tribal society itself, and they collectively take up a task in a group activity. So mostly you will see that the size of the economy is relatively small, and they use very simple technology. They mostly do not engage workers from outside. It's mostly the people from the family, the neighborhood, or from any from within that community itself, who work in cooperation with each other, and they form a kind of a mutual relation of dependence among themselves. Then you have the tribal community, especially the Mundas, the Oraons, Ho, Santhal, the Gonds, and the Wheels, who believe in and who have always set great examples in living as a cooperative unit. Then you again have the idea of gift and ceremonial exchange among the tribes. Normally, when we talk about this idea of exchange, it is a process of in which the process in which these tribal societies, they participate in certain non-economic relational matrix, and it takes the form of a gift and ceremonial exchange. So each group, be it a family member from the neighborhood or somebody from the village, it implies that they need to reciprocate in certain appropriate norms. So they have actually different levels of reciprocity. For example, you have this general reciprocity. In general reciprocity, it involves the assistance that is given or taken back or returned. You are doing something for me, and I would try to do something in return. So basically, the expectation of reciprocity is indefinite. It's not that, okay, I have helped you in one situation and you are trying to help me in another, and that give and take equation has been fulfilled. No, it is something which is indefinite in terms of quantity, quality, and time. It's a sense that, okay, I'm there for you for a very long period of time. We are there for each other. That happens in that tribal kind of a community. And there is no time limit. It depends on the donor and the recipient of that gift. So that is a kind of a general reciprocity that they expect from each other as a member of the community. The second one is the balanced reciprocity, which is a kind of a direct exchange and return, and in terms of return, and in terms of my returns would be of equal value. So for example, you are gifting me something, I would be gifting you something of the same value in return. So the kind of exchange is practiced in a barter system. I would say that, okay, the value of rice is this much and the value of dal is this much. So proportionately, I will try to equate it, rice with dal, and have a pattern of exchange. So this form of reciprocity is considered to be more economic. The first kind of reciprocity that I was talking about, it was more social in nature, that is expected as a member of the community. But this is more economic when we kind of have a economic transaction. And then there is negative reciprocity, which is something despised even in all communities. Means that it is an attempt that you get something, you try to get everything for nothing. I will try to get it in by some hook or crook, and I will not give anything in return, be it in cash or kind, in any way. So it is something which is despised in these tribal communities. So the generalized reciprocity you will find among the Mundas, the Oraons, and the Gonds. Uh, you will see that at the time of transplanting the paddy, some close distant relatives, they will come each other and help each other. After the completion of the entire process, they will have a grand feast with food and drinks as a mark of respect for each other. And when the other side of the relatives would be needing that kind of a help, they would be also extending their hand in them. Then if you talk about this balanced reciprocity, it is normally observed in the artisan tribes, even the agriculturalists like the Oraon and Munds also and Khania, they also go for this kind of a reciprocity. Apart from that, you have another feature of this tribal economic system, that is periodical markets. Markets is the periodical, the local haats or bazaar that we call, mandis that we call. So it has an important place because you know the anthropologist observed the absence of a permanent market in the tribal societies, because you will have these mandis or these haats only once in a week or twice in a week, and they are like not permanent structures and not permanent people who would be you know allotted a place. They are marked with impermanence, and this was a basic feature that was seen among the tribal communities. So these periodical markets, be it weekly, fortnightly, you will find it in almost all tribal regions. So the idea has actually come from these tribal areas. When we are talking about the hearts of Andhra Pradesh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, you will find all these kind of things. And here you will find people from different tribes and caste groups, they come up to conduct business transaction. It is not that these hearts are only restricted to the tribes or to the non-tribes. So they all come together and they would be selling everyday consumable goods. Then another feature is interdependence. When we are talking about the economic relationship among tribes, it is considered that there is a kind of an interrelationship between them. The relationship between tribes within tribes, or tribal people with non-tribal people, are it has always been interdependent with each other. So if you look at the Hindu caste groups, they have this idea of Jajmani system, in which a particular caste groups offer certain services, and in return they have certain kind of uh, they get something in return, maybe in terms of services or in terms of cash or anything, cash or kind. So the family head served by an individual known as the judgeman, while the man who performs are called the kamins of the judgeman. So there is a kind of an economic interdependence. This feature of tribal economy of interdependence, you will see it in Tamil Nadu. And there was this anthropologist named Harkovitz. He has found this idea of Jajmani among the tribes of Tamil Nadu, and there were four major primitive tribal groups in the Nilgiris: the Badaga, the Kota, the Toda, the Kurumba. They engaged themselves in this kind of a relationship of interdependence. Then you have this institution of Dhangar. So basically, what you will see that the agriculturalist, they have a kind of a very strange economic institution of labor, that has been observed by anthropologists. What happens that the institution of labor is known as differently among the landed tribes, and it facilitates effective utilization of human labor and land in cultivation. It is called Thangar among the tribes of Jharkhand, uh, Bengal, among the Bhumis of West Bengal. So here you will also find this practice among the Ho, Oraon, Munda or Ho tribes, and they are engaged on an annual basis, but this tenure may be taking a prolonged year. So from the day of engagement, the person is treated as a family member of the landlord and treated alike. He is regarded as more as an assistant rather than a servant. So this is the practice of dhangar that you will find in the areas of Jharkhand, Bengal, and maybe in some parts of Himalayas also. Then talking about the economic classification of tribes, when you talk about the different types of livelihood that these tribal communities practice, you will see that they have eightfold economic typology. First of all, you have this hunting and gathering society. The livelihood of the tribes mainly depend on collection of minor forest products. So they would be hunting some wild animals, they would be fishing, or they would be, collecting these forest products like edible roots or fruits, nuts, flowers, honey, bamboo, whatever they can use for their subsistence. And some of them would be hunting animals like deers or hares, hunts some birds. And the technology would be very simple, maybe some kind of digging sticks, or some knife, or some bamboo basket. So the technology they carry themselves is extremely simple. So mostly you will find that till date also the Rajis in the Himalayan region, Birhors, the Pahariyas, mostly in these hilly areas, the Korwas, the Juangs in Odisha, the Maria Gonds of Bastar, they have this kind of a practice till date. Then you have this shifting cultivation, which is also called hill cultivation, and in some regions Kodu cultivation. Here you will see that they depend on their livelihood with their agricultural skills. So they rely on three types of cultivation for their survival and sustenance. They are slash and burn cultivation with the help of a digging stick. Normally they burn down, or slash down, clear the forest part. Then hoe and burn cultivation, and terrace cultivation in the hill areas with the help of natural irrigational sources. So the tribes who subsist on the first two hill cultivation, in addition to that, depend on food gathering and hunting. So sometimes they would be going for the shifting cultivation, and some part of the year they would be going for hunting and gathering. So they would be using both the forms of livelihood interchangeably. And you will find a good example of this kind of practice among the northeastern Indians, the middle Indians, like the Mijos, Garos, Nagars, the Chakmas. And apart from that, you have a notable amount of tribes who are into this shifting cultivation in Odisha and Andhra Pradesh and Himachal Pradesh as well. So there is some restriction on this kind of a cultivation because it has led to ecological degradation and low productivity as well. Apart from that, you have the plain agricultural tribes. The most prominent occupation for them is agriculture, and agriculture in the plain regions. Two-third of the tribal population in the country, they go for this settled agriculture for their survival and for meeting their everyday needs. So normally you will find the Jantias of Khasis and Jantias of Meghalaya, Khasas and Tharus of the Rai region in Himachal, Bhumis, Koras, Bhuyas, Santal, Mundas, Hos. These are the tribes who actually go for this kind of an agricultural practice. Then the simple artisan type, here you will find that the tribes depend on certain cottage industries, craft and cottage industries. Normally they go for certain wooden tools, spinning, weaving, or the kind of ikat work that you have. Uh, uh, for example, in Koraput region, you have the Kotpad, which is again a tribal product. So there are so many tribes who are into all these kinds of products. They would be making baskets, ropes, and all different kind of simple tribal products. So you have the Lohars, the Karmalis, the Chigbariks, the Mahalis who are into all these kind of products. Then you have the pastoral and cattle herder type. Normally, they go for herding and rearing of cattle like cow, buffalo, sheep, goats, and they are completely or they partially depend on their subsistence. Mostly the Gujars, the Bakarwals, Gadis, Gads, they are into this kind of a practice. Then the folk artists, you will find many folk artists like the Nuts and Saperas in North India, the Mundupattas and Kelas of Odisha, Pardhans and Ojhas of Jharkhand, Madariyas and Pamulas, Garadiyas of Andhra Pradesh. They are, they belong to that kind of a tribal group who engage themselves in some kind of small folk kind of art practices. So it could be aerobatic, singing, dancing, some kind of performance related. the kalbelas of Rajasthan, you have these very popular saperas. They are also mostly from the tribal communities. Then you have the agricultural and non-agricultural labor type. You will see that you know there is no single tribe that can be included under agricultural tribe or industrial labor type. Yet many of the members of the agricultural and artisan tribes have taken avenues of employment in agriculture and industries. So the tribal agricultural laborers mostly worked in their own locality within the radius of few kilometers. On the other hand, non-agricultural industrial laborers, they work in different industries. Most of the industrial laborers are generally seasonal migrants. So when there is agricultural season, they would be working in the agricultural sector, and maybe they would migrate in the other season to work in these factories and industries or mills, or the distant mills. Then there are some tribes who have because of educational advancement that has come with the spread of Christianity, reservation policy of the government of India, they have been able to take up certain jobs, white collar skilled jobs. And there are many individuals and households of these tribes who could be seen working in government offices, factories. Apart from that, you have the Votias of Indochino, Indo-Tibetan border, the Valmikis, the hikers of Andhra Pradesh, who mostly, depend on trade for their subsistence, and they are very good in that area. Then talking about economic change, there are, we could identify, we don't have much time, so I will try to cover up 2 units here, so I'll very briefly talk about it. We have identified 5 interrelated processes of economic change, mostly occupational change, modern occupations replacing traditional occupations. And here you will see that uh, in many tribal economies, which used to be primary producing economies, they dependent on land and forest for their livelihood. In response to the initiatives of the government, the tribals have started changing their activities. A number of members of the tribes, they have taken up modern occupation, and some tribes, they have switched over from traditional shifting cultivation to the more settled kind of cultivation that we see in today's times. And then there is subsistence to commercialization, because mostly, as I told you earlier, that the tribes never had this profit motive. They always lived a life which was based on household consumption and for subsistence only. They never had great needs. They hardly created any surplus. But with changing times, they have actually catering to the kind of demands of the market. So they have started producing crops that they could have acquired from the forest and the local markets. The cropping patterns in the tribal regions, they have made a shift from primarily from household consumption to commercial crops now, like potato, green vegetables. They are into the plantation of these things. Then market integration and commoditization. You will see that the national and global market, the forces in the national and global market, the interaction is minimal, but the market forces have penetrated deep in the tribal areas. So you have good roads today, good transport facility, you have banks who could sponsor your new kind of business endeavors, you have merchants, you have money lenders. So now it is being affected by market, and there is more towards moving towards commoditization. Now we have also moved from barter system to monetary economy, and the reason being the same, that we no more you know stick to a kind of a subsistence economy. Then another major feature that you will find among these tribal communities is the idea of proletarialization and depeasantization, which is, again leading them to a form of impoverishment. So you will see that there is an impact of this economic modernization on this tribal institution. The economic integration of tribes into this, and the market penetration, commoditization, and commercialization, it has actually contributed to economic decline of the tribes, because it is very difficult on their part to compete with the mainstream market forces. And this has actually led to indebtedness, alienation of their land, landlessness among the tribes. And then, because to be in the race, they have to, take heavy loans from these non-tribal lenders who are in a very good position to exploit them. So that's the reason why in the 10th 5-year plans there has been some implementation where these tribals could be protected in from, from this kind of economic misery. Then coming to the last part, last unit of your block, that is gender and class stratification in tribal society. I guess all of you are aware of the difference between sex and gender, because when you are talking about gender, we are just referring to certain, what you can say, expectations of roles and expectations of the society. But when I'm talking about sex, I'm talking about the physiological aspect of one's body. So basically, when I'm talking about a biological male and a biological female, I'm talking about sex. And when I'm talking about a man or a woman, I'm talking about gender, because with that comes certain kind of role expectations, and we have different modes of socialization with respect to that. So when it comes to, social stratification, you will see that we have a tendency of hierarchizing all kinds of difference. When I say that there are certain, what we say, factors that are hierarchized, that cannot be hierarchized, but they are different. For example, I would say that, okay, you tend to arrange the students in your class on the basis of their height, or on the basis of the grades they have secured in the present exam system. It's easy to do that. Okay, somebody has scored 20 or out of 30, or somebody has scored 15 out of 30, so you arrange them in a hierarchical order. But when I say that, okay, you try to arrange hierarchically the different forms of music that is available, on the basis of the quality of music, which music would be the best, or which language would be the best, it is impossible. But as human beings, we tend to hierarchize those differences which shouldn't be hierarchized. So gender is one such context where we tend to hierarchize and in those differences. So here you will see that whenever we talk about certain social groups, in the Marxian sense, you have always a ruling class and a subject class. And normally, the idea of stratification in any society, be it in a tribal society or in a non-tribal society, you will see that there is a relation of power, and that power may be, it's dispersed on the basis of gender and class. So when we are talking about gender stratification in a tribal society, there are certain tribal customary laws. you know most of the women communities, they have certain personal laws. The Hindu community, or any other, the Islamic community, they have all their personal laws, and it some way or the other it infringes with the rights of the women. So when we are talking about equality, perhaps you somewhere mess up with the traditional rights of the women. So when you look at any of these societies, you know the tribal societies for that matter, you will see that the kind of customary laws that we have, it is not always conducive to the interest of the women. For example, I'll give you an example of the system of inheritance. Be it in a tribal or a non-tribal society, invariably you will see that it is the inheritance law always favors the men rather than the women. So women are entitled to certain maintenance of rights and expenses for marriage, while men, it is the men who inherit all kinds of land. And even if in some communities, for example, look at the Khasis and the Jantias, the Garos, you will see that here the women, they do inherit property. They do inherit property, but you will see that it is just for namesake. They have ownership, but they don't have control on those property rights. So that is the basic difference you will see that most of these tribal communities have when it comes to control and ownership of property. And especially we normally speak a great about the Khasis, the tribes of the northeast, because they are the only tribes where inheritance law is traced in a matrilineal descent, not in through a patrilineal descent. But here it is also important to know that ownership is given to women. A daughter would inherit the property from the mother, and then it would be passed on to her daughter, not to the sons. But the sole custodians of the property would remain in the hands of the men, that is the brother of that girl who is inheriting the property. So that's the reason why we say that even if some of the tribes, they have good laws of inheritance for the women, they don't have control or ownership rights over that property. Then when we talk about women in tribal economy and the different political structures, you would see that you know there is a division as far of labor, as far as the tasks are concerned. Some tasks that is considered to be hazardous, it is ascribed to men. And normally when we talk about sex and gender, we say that gender is a variable while sex is constant, because your biology is not going to change, but the kind of gender training that you will have, it would vary from society to society. So if you might have heard about Margaret Mead or Ruth Benedict. They have taken up ethnographic studies in some of these primitive Latin American countries, and they could actually see tribes which had complete gender reversals. What I mean to say, that there were tribes where men used to behave like women, and women used to have those masculine qualities. They would be hitting blows, blowing each other's face. They would be being very aggressive, and biologically they would be just giving birth to the babies, then handing it over to the men to raise them up. And in those societies, the women would be going for hunting. And she could also come across societies where one gender was missing, both men and women were feminine. So many kinds of such tribal societies were witnessed. So what I'm trying to say, that in case of India, the tribes are at different levels of economic development as far as the role of women was concerned. You have food gathering and hunting society. You have this shifting cultivation or cultivation by plowing. So you have tribals working in mines and industries. So these were the kind of tribes where the role of man was seen to be more significant as far as the economic system was considered. You will find that the Birhors in Bihar, hunting job of men, while men would take up the job of hunting, while the women would be in charge of collecting food, the fruits, the edible roots, or other forest products. And the women will also cook the meal and look after the children and manage the household affairs. Besides hunting, you have the Birhors who are into the craft of rope making, and here you will see that the women play an important role. Then you have the Mundas and the Oravans and the Santhal. And women normally in these societies, they shoulder equal responsibility with the men. Women would be, transplanting and harvesting. They would be weeding. They would be reaping. They would be husking and winnowing those grains. While men would be only plowing, leveling, irrigating, and watching the crops. And besides all kind of household work and collecting of firewood, fuel wood, it would fall on the women. The responsibility would be that of the women. Similarly, todas, they have this pastoral economy, and it is considered to be a taboo for women to enter the dairies, since they are considered to be impure. So mostly they abstain women from doing that. And in patrilineal societies like the Khasis, women mostly engage in trade. They sell fish, they stitch clothes, and they go to the market as well. So there today you will see that there is a change in the status of women from time to time as far as these tribal economies are concerned. uh, Normally you will see that mostly these tribes have a different you know way of witnessing. uh, just give me a moment, I have some issues with my computer. Yeah, yeah. So you will see that there are some tribes which are patrilineal, like the Gonds, the Santals, the Bills, Mundas. And patrilineals, as I told you earlier, they trace their descent through the male line, through the male ancestor, and here property is inherited by the males only. But you have in South India, there is this Urula tribe, and it is one of the major patriarchal tribes of Tamil Nadu. A daughter's right to ancestral property of her father is recognized when there is no male lineal descendants, or when she is a widow or the mother of a deceased. So it is noticed, however, that tribal women are not totally debarred from owning any kind of property, as the way in Hindu societies you will find. And most of the tribes, unmarried women have absolute right over their own earnings. They can inherit movable property. And then you have the Khasis, the Garos, the Jantias, and the Meghalayas, where they have a kind of a matrilineal, matriarchal, matrilocal property. Kind of, decent is arranged. But in these societies, as I told you, even though the line of inheritance is drawn through the women of the family, uh, mostly the control lies in the hands of the men. And the Khasis property is managed by the wife's brother. So basically, you are the manager of your sister's property. Your wife's property is managed by his brother. So, the uncle has a prominent role in the Khasi tribes. And among the Garos, by the husband and the father in law. So, the matrilineal social structure by law goes in favor of tribal women, but it is not as favorable the way it has been romanticized by some anthropologists, because the major control lies with the men. Then coming to your idea of class, normally in Marxist terms, a class is a group of people defined by their relationship to the means of production. So either you own the means of production or you don't own the means of production. And on the basis of that, your class is determined. And classes are seen to have their origin in the division of the social product into a necessary product and a surplus product. So you will see that Marx has talked historically about the class wars. For right from the very beginning, we talk about different stages of development on the basis of modes of production. And in every society, you have seen some kind of class antagonism, which has resulted because of the situation, because some group has been able to control the property while the other group has not been able to do so. But the thing is that Marx saw class categories to be historical, and he believed that human relationships will change over time, and he is talking about a classless society that we would be approaching someday or the other. But Max Weber, on the other hand, suggests that social classes are aggregates of individuals who have the same opportunities of acquiring goods and who have the same standard of living. Means you have the same opportunities, you are in the same market situation, and you have the same standard of living. So, social classes are based on economic relationship to market. You are either a owner, a renter, or an employee. While social status, Weber is talking about another category called status. Status is like your honor. For example, I would say that uh, what kind of honor or respect you enjoy in a society. It could be, because of the basis of your caste. The idea of caste, for example, it could be an example of a status group. So class and status, he is actually categorizing them into two different things. So social class is completely an economic category that is related to your market position. Status is a non-economic category. It can come from your education, your caste, the kind of honor and prestige you receive in the society, which has nothing to do with economic situation. For example, a contractor might be earning much more than a teacher, but the kind of respect and honor that a teacher is given in a particular society is better than that. So it's the difference between class and status. And while he is talking about another concept called party, which refers to certain affiliation in the political domain. So here Max Weber is talking about different categories and a social class. If you look at some of the other thinkers like Bourdieu. Bourdieu talks about the idea of taste, the taste of a working class, and the kind of social, the taste that is being enjoyed by somebody who is from the bourgeois taste and the working class taste. So social class is a segment of a society with all the members of all the ages and both the sex who share the same general status, and it is distinguished by higher and lower class that exist in a society. So basically in that context, a social class could be a status group, and class is related to status. So different statuses arise in a society as the people do different things. And class is something which is very universal, and you will find it in almost every society. So for a very long period of time, we were under the impression that the tribes, they do not follow any kind of stratification system as far as the idea of class and status is concerned. But if you look at the work of Varier Elvin, Varier Elvin, I was referring to Elvin in my last class, where he has spent all his life in majority of the tribal villages of the country. I mean, starting from north to south, east to west, he has not left behind any of the tribes. And Ferrier Elvin, with his extensive knowledge on the tribal societies, he has talked about four different classes. Class 1 is the purest of the pure tribal groups, comprising of 2 or 3 millions people. Mostly you will see them, the geographical conditions have protected them to some extent, and they maintain their traditions and their tribal organization. Then you have class 2. This group, they have retained their tribal mode of life. They exhibit the characteristics like, instead of a communal life, this group lives in a village. They become individualistic. In contrast to class 1, they do not share things to one another. Axe cultivation has ceased to be the way of life for them, and members of these tribes are contaminated by the outside life. They come too much in contact with the outsiders, and somehow you will find the influence of it. Class 3, the tribes belonging to class 3, they are the largest section of the tribal population. Could you maintain silence, please? So members of this class of tribal group, they are actually in a state of transition. There you will see, there is a large section of this population was reduced to bonded laborers during the Jamindari times. Now their status has changed. You will see some of them in these plantation mines, in these construction workers. So they are more into these modern activities, and now they see a change status in the present times. Class 4, they consist of the old aristocracy of the country, like the great Vils, the Naga chieftains, the Gond Rajas. We have heard of stories of them. So they basically belong to this category, which had certain kind of status in the society. When you talk about the, say, the wealthy Santals, the Oran leaders, they had that leadership quality. And basically they retain the old tribal names and the totem rules, and at the same time they observe, they have adopted you know some of the traits from the Hindu religion. So, according to Elvin, tribes of this class have won the battle of culture contact, because, in spite of being, Hinduized in some context, they have been able to retain their tribal elements. Then, Ghure has also, divided the tribes into three classes. The first one is the Raj Gonds, who have, successfully won all the battles, and they are a high status in the Hindu society. Second, the large mass that has been partially Hinduized because of their contact with Hindu. And thirdly, the one who show too much of resistance, and they have, alienated themselves from their culture. So maybe that's about the pattern of class that we of late have identified in today's contemporary tribes. And basically, what we did today was we were talking about the different tribal structures, and especially the focus was on tribal economy, how the transition has taken place in these economies because of these present globalized neoliberal times. And maybe the second part, where some other issues which are which have developed in the recent times, we would be taking it up tomorrow. Any thing that you want to add to, any suggestions or anything? Yeah,
Yeah, good evening, ma'am.
yeah.
Ma'am, there is a particular word that is coming again and again. That is
Hmm?
totem with relation to the tribes and clans or families, ma'am. Totem.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you remember, your name, good name is Hussein.
Yeah, ma'am. Hussein.
Yeah, Hussein, if you remember in last class, we were having a discussion on Durkheim. Durkheim actually talks about this concept of totem, which was mostly seen in the aborigines of the Australian tribes, and in also in the Hindu societies, we stick to some kind of totems. Totem means I would be having my linkage, my ancestral linkage to some kind of animal or plant or some rishis. We believe, no, we have descended down from some rishis. So in the tribal society, they believe that they have descended from some particular animal. Maybe it could be a tiger or some particular plant. So they use it as a symbol of their clan, that it is like a symbol, it is something which is very sacred, they worship it. And suppose if my totem is a goat, I would never eat mutton in my life. Okay, so they tend to worship that totem.
Okay, ma'am. Got it. Like, ma'am, that the incident of Salman Khan of Black Buck took place in Rajasthan. So that Black Buck was the totem of that particular tribe who were
Yeah,
supposed.
yeah, very good. Yes, yes, that's a very good
Okay.
reference to that point. Yeah,
Thank you.
May I ask one question, ma'am?
yeah.
Ma'am, I'm new to this session. I got one email from the RC
Mhm.
Bhubaneswar.
Mhm.
Afterwards, all the counseling sessions will be arranged by the RC Bhubaneswar.
I'm not sure about it, sir, but maybe you can, in the beginning of the classes, the members of the RC Bhubaneswar team join the group. Maybe you can just talk to them when in the beginning of the
Yeah,
session itself. Because we
because
are just asked to counsel the session just for an hour. I'm really not
okay,
sure about this entire
okay.
procedure we
Where
are
can I?
following.
Yeah, where can I get the futures counseling session schedule?
Schedule, they have prepared a schedule. You in the beginning of the session, normally, members from the RC join. They can actually provide you the schedules.
Okay, because I'm getting all the updates from the RC Bhubaneswar, although I have been registered with the RC Nagpur. That is amazing. That's why I asked you some
No,
this question.
no, I'm clueless. I'm clueless about it. Thank you.
Fine, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we would stop today's session right here. Maybe we can meet next, yes, coming, yeah, tomorrow, and we will take up the third block, that is on tribal transition again, and it is on the some of other issues that we'll be taking it up other in the say part 2 of the transition issues. Thank you.
Okay, okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.